God of War is one of my favorite franchises of all time, and the most recent game, God of War Ragnarok, has gotten a ton of big news recently. For starters, we randomly got the new Game Plus update that was shadow dropped by Sony Santa Monica, so that's officially out in the wild, and development on the new game is reportedly underway. But what's going to happen between then and now? But what if I told you that something else is coming before God of War 6? Well, according to some new developments, it's sounding like the Norse timeline is not done just yet. We have a statement that I'd like to talk about from Cory Barlog, as well as a new statement from Sunny Soljic that almost feels like a teaser for what's to come for the character Atreus. And now that we have the new Game Plus update, we're going to also talk about just the overall future of God of War Ragnarok and whether or not the content updates are completely over with, or if Sony Santa Monica has something else planned for us in the future, for instance, a paid expansion. So we're going to talk about that and more. Do you want to win a PS5? Well, I'm giving one away for 110,000 subscribers. We're getting very close. So all you have to do is subscribe to the channel, comment your Twitter handle, send me proof that you're subscribed either via my Twitter or my Discord. The winner will be announced at 110,000 subscribers. Now, if you've been following God of War Ragnarok at all since launch, you probably heard about the new Game Plus update that recently dropped with no real warning. They just kind of shadow dropped it on us without any type of hype or marketing. I won't lie, I was kind of shocked when they dropped the new Game Plus update. It was kind of surprising for me, despite us already knowing that the mode would be coming out in spring. But since we didn't have a release date, it was kind of starting to look like we would have to wait until May or early June. But alas, here we are. The update is in our hands. But that all kind of begs the question, what does the future look like for God of War Ragnarok? Well, we know the game is going to get released on PC sometime in the future, and now that we have possibly the last piece of content for God of War Ragnarok, all sites are currently set on the PC release. Now, when it comes to the future of God of War and just Ragnarok content, a Twitter thread between Cory Barlog and a passionate God of War fan has recently been brought to people's attention and is starting to reignite some rumors of a paid expansion. In case you didn't know, it was confirmed that God of War Ragnarok was going to be the last God of War game set in the Norse mythology, meaning as far as we know from the developers, God of War 6 will feature a new setting and pull influence from a new section of history. The main rumors right now are suggesting that it will be set in ancient Egypt. However, a Twitter thread from Cory Barlog from November of 2022 seems to suggest that there is more going on behind the scenes. Cory was the main director of God of War 2018 and a co-director of Ragnarok, although his involvement of the story was heavily scaled back, specifically for the sequel. Now, apparently this was so that he could start storyboarding for his next game or for the new God of War 6 game. But when asked about the decision to make the Norse timeline a duopoly instead of a trilogy, Barlog had some interesting things to say. A fan named Ethan tweeted at Cory Barlog asking why there were no plans for a third Norse game due to the ending of Ragnarok being a bit disappointing and felt rushed. Now, in a situation like this, most big name creatives like Cory Barlog would probably just read it and then move on, but Barlog decided to write back, stating he thought that the God of War Ragnarok team did a great job closing up the story. But when Ethan responded to once again criticizing the end of the story for being rushed, Barlog responded with, "It's cool you don't like it, no worries." But in the 2018 game, Kratos, Atreus, and Freya discussed Jormi while riding the gondola before going to Alfheim. She talks about how Jormi just appears one day and no one knows why or how. Now, Cory said in Ragnarok, we closed the loop connecting it to Loki, but how he got back in time, well, that's a story for another game. This interaction happened on November 17th of 2022, about a week after the game launched, and well after the confirmation that God of War 6 would be another series refresh. So why would one of the main creatives head of the franchise so explicitly say that there is more story to tell? Now, while it's possible that this plot thread will be touched upon in God of War 6, it seems rather unlikely since it's going to be another series refresh like God of War 2018 was, meaning it won't really be the right time for pre-existing plot threads to be reopened and examined like this. With the immense success of God of War Ragnarok, it seems very likely that Santa Monica Studios had been quietly working on either a paid expansion or a spin-off game that dives back into the story and closes any holes that fans have found along the way. Now, in my previous videos, I've said that Ragnarok's window for a paid expansion has more or less closed due to the game's age, but I've had a bit of change of heart on that front for several reasons. While it's true that most single-player games get their paid expansions within the first year of them being on the market, that trend has more or less changed over the last few years, partially due to the slower game development times in a post-2020 world. Horizon Forbidden West is about to get its first major expansion, and that game launched in February 2022, meaning fans will have waited 14 months for an expansion. And then there's Elden Ring, another great game that was released in February 2022, was also recently confirmed to be getting an expansion, but it's likely not going to release for another 6 to possibly even 8 months, meaning fans of that game will have been waiting close to 2 years by the time more content is released. Given the fact that God of War Ragnarok is one of the biggest games on the PlayStation and will likely continue holding public's interest for months to come, I see no reason why a paid expansion needs to be released as soon as possible. The same could be said about a spin-off game. Personally, I think as long as the expansion drops before the 2-year anniversary of the game's launch, it will still have plenty of public interest and sell well enough to justify the development costs, especially if Sony keeps the God of War hype trend going along along with the upcoming Amazon Prime series. Now, to kind of further add on to the rumors of a paid expansion or a potential spin-off game are some recent statements made by Sunny Suljic, the 17-year-old actor who provided the voice and the motion capture work for Atreus in both Norse-themed God of War games. Now, recently, Sunny Suljic stated in an interview that he would love to see his character's story continued. He said, "I think there are so many routes where Atreus can go." He then said the people working on the narrative aspects will have a better idea of this than I, and then I think that it would be cool to see Atreus grow into a man. I've had the opportunity to grow up with the character. I feel like I can see myself a lot in the character as well, so I feel like we're both developing at the same time. Now, it's not uncommon for actors to be this attached to their characters, especially if they've been playing them for such a long time, but I wouldn't be surprised if Sunny Suljic knows something that we don't, perhaps about a potential return to the role in the near future. Now, it seems unlikely that Atreus will return in God of War 6 once the story is reset again, but if a Ragnarok expansion or even a spin-off game in the Norse timeline were to come out, I'm almost certain that the writers would find a way to bring the character back into the spotlight, despite the way the main story ended. Speaking of God of War Ragnarok actors, Ben Prendergast made a very interesting statement at PAX East earlier this year that also seemed to allude to a possible expansion. Now, Prendergast received acclaim for his portrayal of Tyr in Ragnarok, and most people are in agreement that the character won't return to the series once the mythology changes settings in God of War 6. However, during an interview at PAX East, Prendergast said on no uncertain terms, the Ragnarok would not be the last time we see his character, which, let's be honest, with all of the poses that Tyr is doing after the game ends, it's a pretty puzzling situation. Also, just a friendly reminder that as of recording this video, there is no public plans for a Ragnarok expansion, and since Tyr is a Norse character through and through, this statement from Ben almost seems like a slip up. Now, it is possible that Prendergast was also referring to Tyr's appearance in the upcoming Amazon series based on the Norse mythology, but it's also entirely possible that he's planning on returning for an expansion or a spin-off of some kind. Only time will tell. But just in case that wasn't convincing enough, another Ragnarok voice actor recently made a statement that suggests that there's more Norse content in the works. Adam Harrington, who plays Sindri, was also talking to fans on Twitter. Someone tweeted at him and said that they didn't see an end coming and had hoped that there would be a better ending for the brothers, to which Harrington simply said, "Time will tell." Now, you may think I'm reaching here, but think about it. Why would he be saying this if there was no plans to continue the Norse story? Why would any of the actors say any of these things if Ragnarok truly was the end of the Norse chapter in the God of War saga? It personally just doesn't make sense to me, and the more I think about it, the more convinced I am that there is some kind of either paid expansion or spin-off quietly in the works over at Santa Monica Studios. Now, as I've alluded to in this video, another possibility here is that the next God of War game is not going to be a paid expansion, but instead a spin-off game. God of War fans have always followed Kratos in one way or another, but if all of the actors seem to be in agreement that there's something more going on, and it's not an expansion for God of War Ragnarok, we could actually be looking at a spin-off game in the near future intended to hold us over until the release of God of War 6. Personally, I think a spin-off set in the Norse timeline starring all of the side characters like Tyr, Atreus, Sindri, Angrboda would be an awesome idea and a great way to flesh that part of the God of War universe out without derailing the main story before the release of the next mainline game. Santa Monica Studios have a lot of people working for them, and Sony has all of the funding that they could ever need to get more hands on deck, so I have no problem believing that they could be working on both God of War 6 and some kind of Norse themed spin-off game at the same time. After how big Ragnarok was, I'm sure the idea has crossed Sony's mind at least once, and if it hasn't, then it probably should. So now that God of War Ragnarok's New Game Plus mode has been released, it's hard not to think about where the series is going next. Since we don't have a paid expansion in the official schedule, does that mean after the PC port releases, is the support for the game over? Or are we still going to get some occasional patches and different small content updates? Ragnarok is strictly a single player game, so it's not the kind of thing that would be getting regular updates that add more content as well as story content, especially since there aren't any major technical issues that need ironing out. The only update that I can personally see releasing at this point is some kind of major expansion that adds to the story, and that kind of thing would get a major marketing push similar to the upcoming Horizon Burning Shores DLC, but also may still be at least another few months, maybe 6 to 8 months from being announced. I suppose it's possible that we hear something at the upcoming PlayStation showcase that's currently rumored to be taking place sometime in June around the Xbox showcase, but even that might be a stretch with how much news Sony likely has to talk about. For instance, new hardware, Spider-Man 2, The Last of Us multiplayer game, and so on and so forth. Personally, I think that there's going to be a paid expansion for God of War Ragnarok, but I'm also kind of leaning on the fence of a spin-off game releasing. Now, if there's going to be just an expansion for God of War Ragnarok, I have a feeling that that will be announced at the upcoming PlayStation showcase, but if the rumors that are stirring are actually about a spin-off game, we'll have to wait a bit longer. An expansion for God of War Ragnarok will likely be announced in the near future, but a spin-off game will need a lot more time in the oven, and Sony likely won't want to start marketing announcing that game until it's a little bit further along in development. So we probably wouldn't hear about anything like that until late 2023 at the absolute earliest. But at this point, we only have a couple of more months until we know for sure. I absolutely loved God of War Ragnarok, and I really hope that there are more stories to be told in the Norse timeline, especially before we leave it behind for something new. I'm honestly kind of torn because as excited as I am for the series to move on, I think there are a ton of additional stories that could totally be told with the existing characters. So hopefully Santa Monica Studios and Sony come to some kind of compromise that allows both scenarios to coexist. I do think that the franchise should focus on one setting at a time, but hopefully before we officially transition to the next chapter of the God of War saga, we get a little bit more time with the Norse world, be it through a paid expansion for God of War Ragnarok or a spin-off game starring the side characters. But let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section, like the video, subscribe to the channel with your notifications on if you have not already, and let me know what you think about the future of God of War. Are you on team paid expansion or are you on team spin-off? Guys, don't forget to enter the 110,000 subscriber giveaway. The pinned comment has all of the details, and thank you all for watching. This has been Wes, and I'll talk to you guys in the next video.